Look at that, you all just suddenly went quiet. Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, everybody. Here we are in a winter's night in July, mid-2025. Welcome, welcome. My name is Dr. Kiera Lindsey, and this is the second of the Talking History series for 2025. So I'm based at the History Trust of South Australia, and I serve the state as South Australia's history advocate. Namani, Nadulu Tumpandi, Nadulu Ghana Yatanga Tikanthi. And these beautiful Ghana words acknowledge that we are sitting on Ghana country tonight. By speaking these words in Ghana language, I pay my respects to Ghana people, their elders past and present, and acknowledge the myriad ways that Ghana heritage and culture and that long-standing relationship with country, with this land, continues to charge it with ancient power and meaning. Now, the housekeeping. If there is an emergency, please don't panic entirely. Just do whatever the security guards tell you to do, and we'll conduct ourselves in a very civilised South Australian way out the doors. The bathrooms, as you probably know, are downstairs. You can take the lift or use the stairs out the door, first left and then on your left. So, Talking History is one of the numerous offerings by the History Trust of South Australia. The program is now well over a decade old and exists to bring people together to talk history. And not just any history. We're talking specifically about South Australian history. In addition to the absolutely fabulous History Festival, which runs for the entire month of May, the History Trust stewards the annual Bay to Birdwood Car Rally and 3 public museums, the Migration Museum, the Maritime Museum, the National Motor Museum, and a gallery known as the Centre of Democracy. The History Trust also delivers a swathe of other initiatives in education, in collections management, and in digital technology. Digital transformation. But to ensure that the Talking History program remains alive to the ever-changing nature of a historical inquiry, the History Trust strives to constantly explore unique perspectives and topics. And we strive to do this by designing and delivering panels for this series on a diverse topics, perspectives and approaches. In addition to regularly inviting presenters who may not necessarily think of themselves as history lovers, let alone historians, we do this because we understand that history is an ever-evolving, dynamic and dangerous, sometimes dangerous practice and passion that must enjoy regular interlocutions with other disciplines, individuals and ideas. Well, that's a bit of a mouthful. Really what I'm trying to say here is that history, in order for it to remain healthy and fertile and functioning, purposeful and relevant, it must be a broad church that engages with our ever-changing world because, quite frankly, the past belongs to all of us. Tonight's Talking History is the second in a 4-part program. Last month we hosted the first event and there'll be future events in August and September. This year's Talking History also involves a partnership with the State Library of South Australia, who are supporting us by hosting us tonight in this gorgeous room. As in previous years, tonight I'm going to introduce each panellist, who will talk for about 15 minutes each. Once all our speakers have concluded, I'll ask the panellists 1 or 2 questions on the stage and then open the floor to you to ask them questions. So start thinking about what you might like to ask people. I'll do my best to keep things so that we wrap up just before 8 p.m, and I'll do that by flagging to the speakers when they've got 5 minutes to go. Now, you might have noticed that this year we've tried to curate the program so that it's aligned to other festival activities in South Australia. For example, in September we're going to run an event which is focused on South Australia's environmental history, and that will link in with the Nature Festival. And in August, the Talking History topic, uncovering an array of arts and cultural traditions in South Australia, will be linked to the Sala Festival. And last year we did this with that event, and it was really a fantastic event. Lots of conversation, and I think will be the same this year as well. And so tonight, during the Illuminate Festival, we're turning the spotlight on South Australian scintillating subcultures. So what is the deal with subcultures, you might ask? Why? Well, subcultures can be places and spaces of formation and reformation, which often provide an incubus and an outlet of angst, expression, and identity. And as such, they represent, I think, a fascinating but perhaps often neglected way that we humans create community. Of course, we all have many, many identities within our families, within our professional lives, and within our personal fantasies. But there's something about subcultures, I reckon, that we gravitate to and that we generate, which allow for forms of exploration and expression that can be not only pleasurable, but actually deeply profound. At least that's what I've found in the process of meeting with tonight's speakers and having chats about the significance that these subcultures had on their life. I think you're in for a lovely, lovely, lovely night. And beyond those personal impulses and influences, subcultures are really interesting for the role that they can play in shaping and reshaping our societies. Subcultures often mark the margins in ways that can shift and shape the boundaries of social norms, such so in ways that mean that the ideas and individuals who were once shadowy or silenced or subterranean can speak back to power in ways that capture the mood of a moment. And in that process, that which was once out, even really way out, suddenly becomes in, very in. So what about those early pioneers that create those subcultures? Why do they create these curious worlds within worlds? And what do they do when their once obscure and eccentric inside-out universe suddenly becomes so cool that it also becomes a commodity and is commodified? Well, to answer those questions, we've got three fabulous speakers tonight. And we're going to look at these questions through the lens of three very different subcultures in South Australia: surfing, gaming, and hip-hop. Our first speaker tonight is Liz Harfull. She is an author and community historian who is passionate about telling stories of extraordinary, everyday people who make up our communities. She's written 10 books, 10 books, including an acclaimed history of Robe, home to one of the oldest continuously held surfing competitions in the world. To mark the event's 50th anniversary in 2018, Liz published Finding Steve's Place, which captures the life and memories of founder, local surfing legend, Steve Walston. Liz was very keen, even slightly anxious, that I make sure that you know that Liz is not a surfer herself. She's never got on a surfboard, and I don't think she has any intention of doing that. So she's not talking to you tonight as a fellow surfer, a rider of the waves. But nonetheless, she's talking to you as a community historian who was fascinated with Steve's adventures of riding those first waves at Moana in the 1960s and all the fascinating characters he met in that subculture. So please make Liz very, very welcome with the topic of her talk, which is Only a Surfer Knows That Feeling. Thanks, Liz.
someone who doesn't surf, you're going to come off like a total idiot. Guaranteed. It just can't be done. We're into something totally unique, and those who don't do it will never really understand. Just imagine trying to explain what's going through your mind on a wave like this. The truth is, only a surfer knows the feeling. Welcome to Billabong, Surf in the Summer video in 1987.
Good to see a bit of headbanging going on in the audience, and that was playing. So, as Kiera told you under my instructions, I'm not a surfer. And it's the first surfers I interviewed when I was writing the book about Robe were two guys who said in perfect unison, without any rehearsal, that saying, only a surfer knows the feeling, which kind of reminded me that I was an outsider to the world, and also says a lot about how surfers perceive themselves and the experiences that they have. And I thought it was an appropriate way to start tonight to get you all in the mood, but also just to reiterate that I was up against quite a challenge in writing about surfing, because I can't surf, I can barely swim. And even though I'd spent a lot of summers in Robe from the time I was a small child, for me it was about paddling in the water very safely, not going out the back beach and risking my neck riding the waves. The real reason I'm here tonight is because of this guy, Steve Woolston. And he is a bit of a legend in quite a few circles if you are in the surfing community or in Robe, and even further afield with some of the adventures he's had in the world of surfing. And I got to know him when I was doing the Robe book. He had a reputation for being very intimidating and a bit grumpy, and a lot of people were scared of him. But for some reason, even though I couldn't surf, we got on. And he started telling me stories about his life, and I realised there was more than a chapter in a book, and I started recording weekend conversations with him and his mates, and then, decided that, yes, I'd be up for writing a book about his life. And what is quite an extraordinary life, and some things that people are often surprised about, including the fact that he started what is now recognised as one of the oldest continuously held surfing competitions in the world, and his family surf shops, operated by his son Sam, is probably one of the oldest family-owned surf shops still in business. So Steve was born in 1943 in a private hospital a short stroll from the beach at Brighton. And when he was about 8, his father uprooted the family because he got a job with the AMP Land Development Scheme, which was a massive privately funded operation to convert more than 200,000 hectares of bush in the upper southeast into farmland. And the payoff was that you got to purchase on very reasonable terms some of that land. But the families had to go too. Steve's mum wasn't happy about living in a steel hut in the middle of a village that was built on the property of Brecon, but Steve thought all of his life's dreams had come true. He grew up going to the matinees at Brighton Cinema on Saturdays and loved the cowboy films. And when they moved to Keith, he got to learn to ride a horse and work with the men moving stock, and he learned how to shoot a gun and hunt rabbits. He was living his dream. But he didn't like school. In fact, it's fair to say he hated school, and that school didn't really like him either. He had a reputation for being a bit of a rebel, and the headmaster at one stage told him he was an undesirable character. So he left school as soon as he could, and he took up shearing. There we go. Took up shearing. So, and you could argue that shearing is itself a subculture within the agricultural community, and shearing sheds can certainly be a tough environment, not always welcoming to outsiders. But Steve proved to have a natural aptitude, and he soon made some good mates. He was earning decent money and pushing through quite high tallies in the shed, often the gun shearer in the shed, when he discovered the world of surfing in 1966, thanks to a fish burger and a carload of girls. A bit of context before I go on to explain. Surfing has been around in Australia for a while. It first captured our imagination in a major way in the summer of 1914-15, when a famous Olympic swimming champion from Hawaii visited Sydney. Known as the Duke, he made a longboard out of sugar pine and he took it to a beach north of Manly, where he stunned onlookers with a display of what was called surf shooting. The next explosion of interest came in 1956, when lifeguard teams from California and Hawaii came over to Australia for an event held as part of the Melbourne Olympics, and they brought with them their Malibu surfboards. These smaller, lighter boards were made from balsa wood and fiberglass, often with a fin at the back, and that made them very manoeuvrable, unlike the great big heavy longboard that the Duke rode. About 50,000 people showed up at Torquay to watch them in action. Unfortunately, the waves weren't great that day, so they didn't necessarily see much, but they got out on the beaches around Sydney too, and people were staggered at what they saw. By the late 1950s, surfing was becoming part of our pop culture, and historians credit this movie, Gidget, with actually taking surfing mainstream around the world. It was the story of a young surfer girl, and at that point I have to say, although girls did surf, they were more often than not expected just to sit on the beach and look pretty rather than ride a board. But this Gidget had some really cool friends and some cool adventures, friends with names like Moondoggy and Hotshot. And one of the things I learnt really quickly is everybody in the surfing world has a nickname. Except perhaps Steve, which I found really interesting. The surf scene was soon influencing fashion and music through bands like the Beach Boys and the Atlantics, and it was changing the way teenagers spoke too. In 1962, the ever-helpful Australian Women's Weekly decided it was time to give some support to bemused parents, and it ran a whole page of definitions of surfy slang, suggesting if you're a Sandy who dreams of riding an elephant gun out the back, waiting to beach a boomer without going down the mine, you better study this. I'm sure they didn't have any idea what they were talking about. But then in 1964, 2 years before Steve picked up his first board, Sydney hosted the first World Surfing Championship, where Australian surfers Midge Farrelly and Phyllis O'Donnell claimed the men's and women's titles before 65,000 spectators and a national television audience. Now, in the 1960s in Adelaide, the coolest place to hang out was the city's first American-style fast food hamburger joint. Burger King opened its flagship drive-in restaurant on Anzac Highway at Keswick in 1962. Radically for Adelaide, it was open to 1 a.m, 6 days a week, and 11:30 on Sundays, when the rest of the city was pretty much shut down. So this was the place to go if you were a country boy and you wanted to know where the parties were in town and pick up some girls. Steve pulled in one Friday night with his blue heeler dog Mulga Bill, a mate driving his favourite car, an eye-catching tomato red Sunbeam Alpine. Steve and a lot of his shearing mates were into sports cars. And he parked opposite a Morris Minor full of girls, who eventually invited Steve and his mate to the beach the next day at Moana. At some stage, someone offered Steve a board to try out. Unlike a lot of surfers, he cannot actually recall every detail of the first time he stood up on a board and rode a wave. But within days, he'd bought his own board, a maroon-coloured Keo, which was about 9 foot 6 inches long. Steve's about 6'2", and he said it was thick and heavy as hell, like most of the boards at the time. It cost him $103 in the brand new decimal currency that had just come in earlier that year. He made his all-important purchase at Jeff's Surf Shop in Gawler Place. Now, unlikely as it might sound, this shop was owned by a piano impresario, Hedley Smith. He made his money selling pianos to families. The business also involved his children, Ron, Richard, Maureen, Dave and Jeff was a South Australian junior surfing champion. This part of Steve's story has been put together with help from Ron and his daughter Sharon, who's been researching her family's history for some time now and is gathering together some amazing material. And if anyone in the room has any other stories or material about this family and would like to connect with Sharon, come and see me. Jeff's surf shop started out in the same premises as Headley's piano store, but in 1966 it expanded into a larger two-storey premises. Some big names in surfing were brought over from interstate to help celebrate the opening. They included Nat Young, who that year won the World Surfing Championship, and a very young Wayne Lynch, who was rated the third best surfer of all time by Surfing Magazine in 2004. According to Ron, the business was pretty much an instant success. They secured the local agency for some leading brands, and Ron was also busy manufacturing his own boards at a factory at Morphettvale. This is the sign pointing to the business. Maureen, his sister, became famous for her Sundowner bikini swimwear range, which was made in the shop, on the shop's second floor. Headley bought up a heap of second-hand sewing machines, and that became the manufacturing centre for Sundowner beachwear. Steve hit it off with Ronnie in particular, and the following summer he was offered a job so he could earn some money while he indulged in his new favourite pastime. Initially he worked in another Smith family enterprise, Fiberglass Constructions, which repaired surfboards and made bodies for elite racing cars, and is probably best known for producing the Camaro speedboats. Then after a month or two, Steve moved to the shop and gained his first taste of retail. But Steve grew tired of city life, and after a stint working in the outback, he decided to return to the southeast. In the 1960s and 70s, there was what was called a country soul subculture within surfing, and it was about connecting with nature while you were searching for the perfect wave. Steve didn't need to reinvent himself to become part of this. It was genuinely how he lived his life. He spent a lot of time in the bush and he loved camping. In the autumn and spring he made good money shearing, and in the winter he travelled north to warmer climes to surf, and in the summer he headed to Robe. He'd been going there just at weekends with a small crew from Keith known as the Green Desert Surf Riders. They were founded by a local school teacher, and it included farmers' sons, a mechanic, a bank teller and one female, Glad, the local domestic science teacher. They even had their own official t-shirts, which were whipped up on the school's screen printing gear. On Friday nights, they'd gather at a cafe and they'd study the weather reports and the tides, and if the conditions looked like they were going to be right, they'd head for the coast. Initially, they worked their way all along the coast between Kingston and Beachport, looking for new places to surf, camping out in the sandhills, tucked out of the wind. Wetsuits were virtually unknown in this time, so to keep warm they had bonfires on the beach, they rubbed themselves over with deep heat, and they drank green ginger wine. There's a few people got bad memories about green ginger wine. One of their favourite places was Midway along Long Beach, and that's known as Third Ramp now, and that's where the road has been named after Steve. So if you drive to Third Ramp, it's Steve Woolston Road. At that point, Robe was a pretty sleepy seaside village, but it was becoming increasingly popular with farming families, and Steve saw a business opportunity. So he talked the Smiths into giving him some gear and setting up a business selling surfboards, initially out of a mini moke. Now, when he drove this into town, there were a lot of locals not necessarily pleased to see him. He recalls pulling up in front of a cafe in the main street and a woman rushing out, waving her arms, saying, "I've heard about you surfers, you keep away from my daughters." And quick as a flash, Steve said, "Oh, you've got daughters, have you?" As he told me, the boys had come to town. which was one of his favourite stories, and it's a pretty fair indication of how the local community reacted initially to this group of guys coming in to surf. It wasn't only the parents who were unhappy though. He ran into some trouble at the local pub where the fishermen decided that they needed to put him in his place. Now Steve says they took bets in the front bar of the pub that he wouldn't be game enough to go in there and have a drink because they were going to beat the hell out of him. Steve was, as I said, over 6 foot tall, broad-shouldered and very fit, being a shearer and a surfer, and he wasn't at all deterred. He walked into the bar and stood there and said, well, here I am. And as he tells the story, a local bloke who was well respected as a local footballer and done a bit of surfing came out of the crowd, stood next to him and said, I'm backing Steve. And that was it. The locals were more forgiving when they found out he was also a shearer. Everything was all right after that, he told me. It made a difference. I wasn't there to upset anyone, and after a while I got on with them and I gradually blended into the town, although I'm not sure he really did. After the success of the first summer, Steve and Ron built this shack, which was their first official shop front. And then in 1970, they ramped things up a bit and they staged the Surf Spectacular and Blues Bop Music Freakout with an Adelaide band, Left Hand Drive. The local paper reported that the Long Beach was crowded with cars, and if they didn't have a surfboard on the roof, you were out of place. Meanwhile, flying overhead was Ron Smith in his Tiger Moth, a familiar sight over Adelaide's beaches where he used to promote the business and patrol for sharks. The weekend program included the screening of a film, Endless Summer, which is sometimes described as the most influential surf movie ever made. Now, by this time, documentary films about surfing and the surfy lifestyle were big business in Australia, and there were pop-up cinemas along the coasts in the summer. Robe became part of that thanks to Steve and surf movie entrepreneur David, the Mexican Sumpter, who made his own films and had a distribution business. Steve recalls him rocking into town for the first time in a combi van, accompanied by Doug Warbrick. And just the year before, Doug Warbrick had set up a business with Brian Singer that became one of the most iconic surf brands in our history, Rip Curl. Doug brought over a few of his prototype wetsuits and Steve became one of his first retailers. After 7 years of trading in temporary premises, Steve bought his own shop. It was the cafe that the woman had come out of to tell him off after arriving in town. It's still there, and his son Sam is running it, and Sam is also running the surfing competition, which, as I said, people are staggered to learn is second, we think, only second to Bells Beach as the oldest in the world, that's still been run continuously. And Bells Beach is held at the same time. Now, Bells Beach is huge, and it has been for decades. So it overshadows the surfing carnival at Robe, which attracts a much smaller crowd and fewer competitors. And it has a relatively modest prize pool too. But Steve was never unhappy about that, and nor is Sam, because they reckon it's all about the spirit of surfing the way it was before big money became involved. And although the waves are nowhere near as big, it's never been cancelled or delayed, and it has a really loyal following. That's it from me.
That's it.
Thank you.
Such evocative photos, right? I feel like you've taken me back to a part of my childhood. Not quite as many mullets as I expected, though. Just wonderful. Thank you very much. So you'll be able to keep your questions to the end, and I'm going to introduce our second speaker tonight, who is the wonderful Tyson Hopprich, also known as Ty. It's been a real joy to get to know Ty in the preparation for tonight, and I know that you're going to really enjoy meeting him too. Ty is a multidisciplinary creative accessibility advocate and a long-time video game enthusiast who is based in Adelaide. As a neurodivergent and physically disabled individual, Ty's work champions inclusive play, innovation and community building across music, digital arts and gaming culture. Over the past 29 years, Ty, also known during his musical career as DJ Trip, sorry, I had to say it like that. Just getting my subculture on. DJ Trip has performed internationally at major festivals and venues, including Mona, FOMO, Dark Mofo, Brisbane Powerhouse, Sydney Opera House, New Victory Theatre on Broadway in New York, and many, many, many more places. Alongside his musical career, Ty has consistently explored the creative potential of video games as cultural artefacts, performance mediums, and tools for accessibility. Precision. Sorry, my eyes just went funny. Ty is also the creator of Ultracade Live, Adelaide's long-running retro gaming club night, which is a unique social experience which blends curated classical games, themed cocktails, DJ sets and competitive gaming tournaments. Some ideas for future Talking Histories, I'm thinking. Themed cocktails, yes please. Ty's passion for gaming, history and culture has also led to him making appearances on ABC's The Collectors and in international magazines like UK's Retro Gamers. We're really lucky to have Ty with us tonight. The topic of his talk is Play, Create, Remember. And please make Ty extremely welcome.
Thank you. Hello. How are you doing? That was a big one. That was a big intro, wasn't it? I'm going to be chatting about play, create, and remember. All right, play, create, remember. Play. I grew up in arcades, lounge rooms, demo scene halls, before gaming and mainstream. Before it was mainstream, it was underground. As a late diagnosed autistic adult, I came to realise play was not just a hobby but a lifeline. It was how I coped and connected and recharged. Create, I craft. Is it all right if I hold it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah. Create. I craft sound art installations from retro consoles, music trackers, repurposed tech, loops, glitches and rhythms. It's raw, hands-on and proudly DIY. Remember, my work celebrates memory, emotion, community, especially for people who felt outside of the norm. This isn't nostalgia for nostalgia's sake, it's a subculture of care. Here's a little video of...
Dance if you dance on what you came for. Dance if you dance on what you came for.
If Pac-Man had affected us as kids, we'd all be running around in dark rooms, munching pills and listening to repetitive electronic music. Marcus Brickstock, which is, to be fair, it's precisely what happened. Pac-Man turned me into a loop-loving, rave soundtracking, nostalgia-chasing artist who builds music, meaning and memories out of games. He didn't ruin me, he raised me one dot at a time. Here's a pretty dorky photo of me in high school. Bought a Commodore Amiga with my saved pocket money, played games, did homework and created on it. I started making music on Octamed Sound Studios, discovered on a free cover disc from Amiga Power magazine. No training, no manuals, just curiosity, fully self-taught. Went to underage raves in high school, saw an artist performing using an Amiga and thought I could do that. Moved out young, lived on food stamps but kept creating. Auditioned for Flinders Street School of Music at TAFE with a cassette of my music and raw enthusiasm. Failed the theory test but still got in, learnt what rules to break. First public gig was at Off the Couch Youth Festival at Carcaloo. And my first self-release debut EP was on cassette, covers printed on the TAFE which I didn't pay for, and tape stubs of my ghetto blaster. Necessity is the mother of invention, Plato. Play. If you don't stop playing because you grow, if you don't stop playing because you grow, what? You don't stop playing because you grow old. You grow old because you stop playing. George Bernard Shaw. Here's a picture of my Oma. My Oma Gerda, born in 1931 in Munich, was a devoted gamer long before gaming went mainstream. Her home was a sanctuary of play, video games, darts, card games, and DIY crafts. 3 generations, Oma, my dad and I all played together. In the 80s, there was no screen time stigma, just inclusive cross-generational fun. Our family culture was playful, creative, and deeply connected through games. Play wasn't just how we passed time, it was how our family connected, laughed, and unlocked our potential. Our tournaments and gaming competitions brought out the best in each of us together. Play is the highest form of research. Albert Einstein, he was a gamer. Jokes. Here's a picture of me and my cousins in the 80s. Some cool pink going on there. School holidays meant crowding around the Commodore 64 with my cousins. We swapped floppy disks, shared tips, and played together Bubble Bobble, Crack Out, and Revenge of the Mutant Camels. Crazy games. These moments were chaotic, creative, and collaborative. I wasn't diagnosed with autism until adulthood, but now I can see how gaming helped me stim and self-soothe and quiet my busy mind. Play created a space where I could feel safe, focused in myself. It wasn't just fun, it was how I coped and connected and recharged. Here's a picture from Retro Gamer magazine in UK with my crazy collection in the cellar. Play is how I make sense of the world. It's my path to health and connection. All right, we're going to create now. All right, this is a crazy picture of a spam gaming pad I made for like retro gaming. Gaming is my canvas. I don't just play. I bend, remix, and turn them into art. Nostalgia is the soundtrack of joy played in reverse. It connects us to happiness and community. Here's I'll just play a short snippet of a video clip. My collaborator and I, Nikki, who's just over there, the music's called Epilogue, featuring Reddy Wolf, who is there as well. All right, this slide is about a game called Balls for Dinner Again. And this was created and finished in 48 hours at Global Game Jam in 2019 by myself, Reddy Wolf, and my other collaborator, Luca Cuckoo. This is powered by the world first voltmetric tech, fast rendering 3D light voxels. So it's sort of a holographic 4-player arcade machine, and the game was sort of like Hungry Hippos on LSD. I'll just play a bit of the video. Here's another installation called Go Out and Play, a game culture installation. This was premiered at the Brisbane Powerhouse 2018. Play, what is it? Seriously, no, seriously, what is play? Go Out and Play is a game culture installation created by artists myself and Justin Clear, who seed this very question, a machine/man-made organic tree of monolith scale, grown out of obsolete technology, rare video games, iconic controllers, and upcycled and repurposed building materials, driven by the gamification of society, a haunting soundtrack, and nostalgia of play, both inside and out. So this tree was 3 metres tall, and at the base of the tree was a subwoofer, which was run by like a car stereo. And on top of that, there was a chainsaw, which was a Resident Evil video game, kind of special limited edition controller. And all the speakers up in the branches were tweeters, which sort of worked with the birds and the tree theme and that kind of stuff. And there was a swing as well, you can't really see in the photo, but that was an IBM keyboard from an old business, which had rope and that kind of stuff. It was pretty crazy to build. And this next installation was exquisite for me, accessible gamified installation. This was produced during my time as program producer at Access to Arts, with tech support from Vox and staff, inspired by exquisite corpse movement, a surreal, collaborative and unpredictable, created by and for disabled artists, blending art, sound, movement into playful interaction. Used gamification and custom interfaces to invite inclusive sensory-based exploration. A joyful celebration of neurodivergence, co-creation and art as access. Here's a small video of it. This premiered at the Mod first, Art Gallery of South Australia, and then Mod. This video is from Mod. So the audience can go up and press the different buttons and it will change the different slides of the head, the body and the legs, and the fourth button was a random button for all the parts. And there was an original soundtrack composed by the disabled artists as well, which we did in workshops. Thank you. Here's another crazy little, this is a bit of a project Nikki and I made in 2021. We were op shopping and found a jewellery box, and we decided to turn it into a 2-player miniature TV, retro game console and hi-fi system with Bluetooth controllers. Games are the only art form where the creator, the system and the audience all co-author the experience. This is paraphrased from concepts of in-game design theory by Salon and Zimmerman Jew. Here's a little video of that. Classics there. And we're going to remember now. This is all about nostalgia. Here's a a little pic of a portion of my collection, which was featured at the Barbicans Game On exhibition, which toured ACME in Melbourne 2008. Subcultures thrive on memory. Nostalgia fuels passion to keep cultures alive against the mainstream currents. As mentioned in the intro, I've been running Ultracade Live for a long time, and yeah, retro gaming reimagined as nightlife culture. Ultracade Live is Adelaide's longest running retro gaming club night, a unique social mashup of classic games, DJ sets, themed cocktails, competitive tournaments, celebrates the culture of arcades, multiplayer chaos, and nostalgic joy. Yep. Managed for club setting. Featured at major events including Adelaide Festival's Barrio Precinct and Brisbane Powerhouse, a living, breathing subculture remix where music, games and communities collide. Come for Street Fighter 2, stay for the chiptunes and nerdcore atmosphere. This is a little promo which was filmed in the Brisbane Powerhouse in 2010. I was a bit younger here.
Celebrating the games, sounds and sprites of the golden era of video game culture. Enter a retro digital mecca. Play classic games, request your favorite themes, dance like a shit geek in high school. Compete in casual tournaments and win game-related prizes. Each event, DJ Trip does Sully's extensive private collection of consoles, games and music with everything from Arkham to Zelda. From the arcade golden era to the peak of the 90s console wars to zombies versus ninjas. Ultracade Live is curated to celebrate an era, a console,
Babyface.
a genre, or a festival theme. DJ Trip mashes up an eclectic mix from classic game themes to the newest hybrid of contemporary 8-bit music and chiptunes from around the world. Over the last 10 years, DJ Trip has spent his waking life creating 8-bit music, collecting retro games, and has even travelled to Tokyo to find the best and weirdest gaming soundtracks to showcase and satisfy your human nerd. Ultracade Live is a nostalgic club event celebrating the games, sounds and sprites of the golden era of video game culture.
Alrighty, just to wrap up here, this is my last Mad Professor little experiment which I showcased at a mod at the Heartbeat Club with Turi Arts. This is a hacked guitar and drum kit which I turned into game controllers. And you can see in the middle there's a guitar amp, and that's actually a game console I put inside. People were invited to play the drums or play guitar to play retro games, which was quite amusing to watch. It was very awkward. People, it's going crazy. When we play, we create. When we remember, we connect. That's the joy of gaming. Subculture built on imagination, expression, and shared memory. Gaming taught me to remix the world, to turn memory into music and play into purpose. Thank you. Thank you. No worries. Get that.
What's going on there? There's no way that I'm going to be anywhere as cool as that. That was fantastic. Thank you, Ty. It's been great fun working with Ty behind the scenes on this one, actually, because we had lots of really rich conversations about his body of work and the role that his nonna is that how I say her name? Is your grandma? Uma. Yeah, the role that she played in encouraging a spirit of gaming in the household, and just to sort of trace that legacy and the freedoms and the connections that it gave you, and then to see that body of work, Ty, is really seriously cool. So thank you. So far we've had a non-practitioner and a practitioner talk, and our next speaker is going to be both, bringing those two worlds together, practice and reflection and theory. And this is the fabulous Dr. Dianne Rodgers. I've been calling her Di because it rhymes with Ty. And Di is a senior lecturer at the University of Adelaide and a long-time hip-hop fan. She is an anthropologist who researches popular music, digital culture and the youth sector, primarily through her own long-term commitment to studying hip-hop culture in Australia. She's the author of a book called The Calling, which was published in 2023, so pretty recently, and it's all about that Adelaide group, the Hilltop Hoods. And she's also the co-editor of the first edited book that explores hip-hop in Australia, which is called Representing Hip-Hop Histories, Politics and Practices in Australia 2024. You've been busy, Di. She's currently leading a big archival hip-hop project, which is actually funded by the History Trust of South Australia. So I think this is a wonderful way to kind of bring together the history and the practice in this final talk tonight. So please welcome Di, whose topic tonight is Whose History? Remembering and Archiving Hip-Hop Culture in South Australia. Bring it, Di.
Thank you so much. So lovely to be here. So I won't kind of recap that because you've heard a little bit about who I am and where I'm from. So University of Adelaide, you might know we're becoming Adelaide University. I like our new colour scheme better, so I've jumped ahead and using our current lovely slides that we will be having next year when we become Adelaide University. So I'm an anthropologist. I'm very interested in studying people, learning about the worlds they create, the meanings they give to their lives. A lot of people, when they think about anthropology, maybe they're thinking about ancient cultures, about history, about the past, and I always like to just start off by reminding people that anthropology is about the study of people now. So it is about contemporary culture. So it's fantastic to be talking to you today about hip-hop culture specifically. And I'm going to start really big by thinking about the history of hip-hop culture. I thought maybe some people might be a little bit less familiar with hip-hop culture, so I'd start with some basics to draw you in to the subculture. So some people might know on August 11th in 2023, many people celebrated what they call the 50th anniversary of hip-hop. And they trace this back to a party that was held in the Bronx in New York City by DJ Kool Herc, who also goes by the name Clive Campbell, is his actual name, and his sister Cindy Campbell in New York. So many people now locate this as one of the origins of hip-hop culture, although like anything, there's lots of debate. So some people were kind of annoyed by this and irritated by this kind of claiming of this one party as being the site where hip-hop has kind of sprung from. In Australia, some people titled this the 40th anniversary of hip-hop, which is really signalling what I'll talk to you about in a second, that 1983 was a very significant year for hip-hop here in this country. So I'll talk to you around some of the media texts that were very influential in forming hip-hop here in this country. But you can see here these anniversaries, 50 years, 40 years, hip-hop's not a new phenomenon. So then this starts to raise some really interesting questions around what does hip-hop mean now here in 2025, many years later. So Mary Fogarty, she's a Canadian breakdancer, and she writes that hip-hop has developed from a rebellious youth culture to now being a multi-generational tradition. And so that's one of the things I'll be reflecting on in this talk. What happens when a formerly quite underground, some people might say oppositional, defiant subculture does start to become massively popular and step into that mainstream arena. First, though, as I said, wanted to give a little bit of context. So most people agree that hip-hop is kind of originating in the South Bronx, USA, in the early 1970s. Some people trace it back earlier than that. So some people emphasise like the role of James Brown, for example, or beat poets. Someone was talking about this to me previously. So like anything, when you try and pin down a history, becomes quite fraught, but most people would kind of say early 1970s, very fundamental. Always really important when talking about hip-hop to recognise that it's birthed from a lot of oppression and hardship and poverty in this era, especially in New York specifically, and to really signal the centrality of black and brown people, African American people, Afro-Caribbean people, Latino people, very, very central to the creation of hip-hop. And this is something that's often quite important to many people here in Australia. So many people who are practicing hip-hop and interested in hip-hop would say recognising those legacies is very fundamental if you care about hip-hop. When I talk about hip-hop in other contexts, many people immediately think about music, and absolutely music is a fundamental and important part of hip-hop. But many people, when they think about hip-hop, they talk about the 4 elements of hip-hop, being, yes, the musical elements of emceeing or rapping and DJing or turntablism, but also that a key part of hip-hop is writing graffiti and breaking, so dance. The other critical part of hip-hop, which maybe is a little bit less well known, is that many people will say, yes, so these 4 elements, the kind of 4 pillars of hip-hop, but there's also a 5th element of knowledge. And many people talk about knowledge of self, respect for the origins, knowing where you come from, kind of giving props to people, acknowledging other people within the culture, being very fundamental to hip-hop. So if you hear anyone saying 5th element, 4 elements, that's what they're talking about in the hip-hop context. From the 1970s onwards, hip-hop obviously kept developing in the United States, but also spread around the world. And people in Australia were learning about hip-hop through travelling to the US and the UK, also being quite important. Some people I've interviewed have even spoken about American sailors coming to the US and bringing cassette tapes with them, so that direct interpersonal communication being really critical to learning about hip-hop. But also very fundamental are media texts. So some people would say hip-hop spread almost like a wildfire around the world, and here in Australia too. And I'm using this directly from a fantastic book, Wildfire, Australian Graffiti, live from Adelaide by David Houston. So I'm drawing on that book in this section here. So media texts like films, like books, like music, but also music video clips themselves are very influential in the spread of hip-hop. So some names for you. Films like Wild Style in 1983, Flashdance, which maybe surprises people, that there were literally young, especially men, going to the cinema, watching Flashdance for a very small scene that features some very famous New York breakers. So people going there just really fundamentally for that scene, and then less interested in the rest of the movie. Star Wars, again in 1983, so hopefully you start to see why that's an important year for us here in Australia. Beat Street in 1984. The book Subway Art is very influential and supposedly one of the most stolen books from libraries of all time, because it documents the early New York graffiti scene, and then people were very interested in studying that and learning from the styles of other graffiti writers. Spray can art in 1987. This already was featuring graffiti from Sydney. So it's showing how quickly other scenes sprang up around the world. Music like Malcolm McLaren's Buffalo Gals. I don't know if anyone remembers this. The film clip actually features all the 4 elements of hip hop. So again, something that people were studying. People took up all the elements of hip hop really quickly in Australia, but especially breaking and especially graffiti. So those really visual, engaging elements that involved movement were particularly popular. And many hip-hop practitioners from this era, they can really vividly tell you like the first moment they saw or heard or were introduced to hip-hop, often through these movies and film clips, and the ways that it kind of just stuck with them and felt like it was meant to be, like it was part of them, and was so super engaging and inspiring to them. In the book Wildfire that I mentioned, like I said, written by David Houston, who is a graffiti writer himself, it recounts that the New York City Breakers performed here in Adelaide at the Old Lion Hotel in 1984. And his work is documenting really important histories, including the role of venues like Downtown, which is on this slide here. Maybe some people went roller skating at Downtown. I don't know if people remember it. But it actually had an event there called Break City in 1985. And for a while, some breakdancing classes were actually happening there at Downtown. It was a popular spot where graffiti writers would meet. So one of the first kind of meeting places for graffiti writers in Adelaide before they moved to the front of Maya. So if you're walking down Rundle Mall, you might have seen in the kind of lobby of Maya, people there sharing images, sharing sketches from their black books and talking about and sharing their graffiti knowledge. So lots of clubs and other public places have always been quite fundamental to hip hop, especially in the early 1980s. After the kind of boom period where there was a lot of media coverage about especially breakdancing and graffiti, breaking I should say, people don't really like when you call it breakdancing, it's a taboo. People started to really see hip hop as a fad. And people in the broader public were kind of saying, why are you still caring about this? Why are you still into this? Like, hip-hop's dead. We've all moved on from this. And there started to be a little bit of a stigma around hip-hop. And it was seen as being a little bit cringe-worthy, as maybe a symbol of Australia becoming Americanised, so not having our own local culture and unique point of view. People really thought, why is this still hanging around? You really could be stereotyped and mocked, and some of the people I've interviewed have actually even talked about physically being assaulted for wearing a cap backwards or having the kind of markers of listening to hip hop in this kind of 1990s, early 2000s period. So MC Raf Ayel, who I interviewed, said, when I was coming up doing hip hop, it wasn't cool to be a rapper. People used to often do that whole yo, yo, yo thing to people, and that would be a bit embarrassing. It's important to see how some of these responses are really shaped by racism and xenophobia, especially keeping in mind at this time First Nations people are really centrally involved, heavily involved in hip-hop in this country. People from migrant families as well, really drawn to hip-hop as a really important way of kind of, I guess, working through feeling like an other, an outsider in Australian culture. Hip-hop has always had that very important kind of power as a form of resistance for young people who feel like they don't fit in an Australian context. So it took time against this kind of backdrop for the local scene to develop, for people to find their own voices, including to start rapping in their own accents in local music. It took some time for that to start to happen. And it took a lot, what I want to emphasise in this talk, a lot of creativity and a lot of hard work from people who are into hip hop, particularly in South Australia, and this is a struggle that many people in subcultures have in South Australia, where there's a smaller population, there's not always the same support for the arts that we would like to see. So there's a lot of challenges around infrastructure and audiences, and people have to really often forge their own pathways. And this is certainly the case in the 1990s in South Australia. And I'm going to show you a quote now from an MC called Kiera, and his actual name is Andrew Bradley. And this is a quote he made at a hip hop festival called Urban Expressions in Sydney in 1998. And he's a member of one of the first Adelaide hip hop groups called Finger Licking Good. And they're the first people to release vinyl from the hip hop scene in South Australia. And the other members were producer DJ Groove Terminator, if people remember, and MC Madcap, who I'm going to talk about a little bit more later. But there's this important quote from MC Kuro, Finger Licking Good. "We do not have any internal structures in this country. We do not have a record label that is devoted to pushing and promoting Australian talent. We do not have a national radio show. We do not have a national magazine. We do not, for the most part, have a great deal of contact between the cities." So this is 1998. He said this in 1999 is when it was published, so I was able to read it. And this is quite a prophetic quote because it is actually predicting many of the things that came in the early 2000s. So early 2000s, we see Triple J, national broadcaster, create the hip hop show. We see a lot of magazines emerge, like Stealth magazine, Out for Fame magazine, increased role of street press for young people to learn about different genres of music and review albums and so on. Quite influential as well, there was a hip hop forum that emerged run by an MC called Mass MC. It was called ozhiphop.com, a really fundamental place for hip hoppers to learn from each other and share music and so on. Other people in South Australia, like Kirk Ray, who's the manager of the Funkors, and PJ Merton, who was the former manager of the Hilltop Hoods, they were creating distribution companies to get music out there and shared with others. We also saw the release of compilation records, like The Culture of Kings by Obese Records, and the launch parties that they held were quite fundamental in kind of celebrating and bringing people into the fold of hip-hop. And maybe you're anticipating this, the mainstream breakthrough of local Adelaide group from Blackwood, the Hilltop Hoods, with The Calling in 2003, really significant point for popularising hip-hop beyond this formerly quite niche underground. So I've been working to capture some of these stories and histories through some ongoing research. So the Hip Hop Histories and Futures project. It's a life history interview project exploring the roles that hip hop has played in people's lives. And yes, it's partially about, you know, what are the events, what are the dates, what are the venues, what are those details. But because I'm an anthropologist, it's fundamentally about that meaning. What does hip hop mean to you? What has it meant to you? How has it shaped your life? What kind of emotions are stirred when you think about hip hop? And I have questions around, you know, your past involvement. What are you doing currently? But also kind of where do you think the scene is going? What do you think is happening within it? Where would you love for it to go? What are your fears and concerns about hip hop? So I'm still very much in this. I've only done 18 interviews so far with a whole heap of different people from across Australia. They're usually 1 hour. It's been quite slow research, but these are some of the early kind of findings. One of the most significant findings which you might anticipate is, and given the nature of the research, it tends to attract people for whom hip hop has been such a core part of their life and significant to them, even people who only participated for a short time. So I've done some really interesting interviews with people who, were doing breaking in 1984 for a year or so, but then haven't been engaged with hip hop. But most people are people who have continued that spark and interest in hip hop. People have often cried or got quite emotional in the interviews. Some people have reflected on people they've lost. So death has been quite significant, or past relationships, or people they're no longer in contact with. So it has been quite an outlet, I guess, doing this interview and talking about this. At times there has been some tensions between people from different generations. So when we're thinking around what hip hop means, often there's different understandings and different positions. And so some people are a little bit concerned about where hip hop is heading. Maybe they think it's not as connected in to those origins and roots as maybe it could be. So there was sometimes some friction there, but also just some really lovely stories of mentorship and the ways that older people are learning from young people and vice versa. So really fantastic knowledge sharing happening. Through doing these interviews, I came to better understand the huge collections of paraphernalia that many hip hop fans have. And I started actually to be super excited, wow, you've got all this material, but also a little bit concerned around what's happening with this. Where is it going? What's kind of the long-term plan for these items that I think actually are very, very important? And because of that, I was lucky to be successful in an application to the South Australian History Fund for its only small project. I'm starting to take some steps to remedy this and to bring some of these items out from all the manila folders and the filing cabinets and the big boxes in the shed that lots of people have. So I really want to shout out my collaborators on this. So it is Derek Madcap Downing, who I talked about as being one of the members of a very early important hip hop group in Adelaide. So he's working to archive all of his personal collection, to digitise it. So especially he was a very famous promoter in the 1990s and onwards. So he has a lot of flyers and other ephemera, ticket stubs, all these lovely fun things like that. And the other person is Anthony Lupoy, who is the editor of Illegal Fame magazine. And he is going to allow me to archive the entire run of Illegal Fame before the physical hard copies are then sent to the National Library. So it's going to be a digital archive. It's accessible through Flickr, the photo sharing app. Once we get to that stage, we're still in the very busy going through boxes and taking photos stage, but is going to help to preserve these really important hip-hop artefacts. And already, as I've spoken more or talked more about it, I'm starting to get those lovely kind of emails you get from people like, oh, I've got stuff. And I'm like, how am I going to have the capacity to archive all of this? But very exciting. So what are some conclusions from all of this? I guess that hip-hop ebbs and flows in popularity, but it has, for a long time, in Australia especially, been quite misunderstood, I think, and devalued. So it's important to recognise this massive role that hip-hop and other subcultures we've heard so lovely today are playing in so many people's lives, that we should celebrate these awesome subcultures that are happening here, that new generations are taking up hip-hop, they're making it their own. It's not always a smooth process when you get that friction between different people, but it's really showing us there's no one history of hip-hop. And it's important to recognise there's community members who are already doing this archival work themselves. There's fantastic books, there's podcasts, but just would love to see more resources to support subcultures, contemporary youth cultures, to make sure these histories aren't lost. Thank you.
All right. So the next part of tonight, we're going to get our three panellists up, and I'm going to ask them a few questions, and then it's your time to ask some questions. So Liz, I'll get you to come up, and then Ty, and then Di, and take a seat. We'll get the mics ready. Well, wasn't that rich and fascinating? And to try, I'm sure many of you in the audience picked up some connections there across the three very different subcultures. Just a few that came to my mind were youth subcultures and the way that, you're often attracted into a subculture as a young person, but it feels like those subcultures, and Ty, I think you were touching on this, really kind of keep people feeling young as well, that sense of play. I was picking up that oppositional, obsessive, gleeful opportunism as well. I thought that was a really kind of common link between them all. And this sense of coded languages, of maybe gatekeepers playing a playful but nonetheless often quite emphatic place in that, the tiding in and tiding out. So a lot of stuff in there for us to unpack. But maybe, and I love, Ty, your use of this phrase, mainstream currents. I thought that was really interesting as a term to think about what role subcultures play within mainstream currents, a kind of ebb and flow back and forth there. Because we've been talking a lot tonight about music and surfing, right? They're kind of forms of flow and wave as well. Maybe we'll do a broad question and then go into a sort of more personal question. And I'll just start with a question to each of you, which is, how do you think, I might start with you, Liz, and just move towards you, Ty, via you, Di, which is, how do you think that this particular subculture has shaped South Australia? It's a massive, big question. Not expecting an exhaustive answer, but just some kind of points that you think would be worth us thinking about. What's the role of kind of this, how much has surfing shaped South Australia as a culture?
Well, my observation is that, in many ways it's incredibly mainstream. There are thousands of people in South Australia who surf. It's so easy these days to learn. Steve is a bit dismissive of how someone can buy a board that's this wide and you'll never fall off, and you can learn to surf really easily, but it's made it more accessible compared with the big boards that he had to learn on. And I think it's become a pretty mainstream part of our summers for no other reason. There are families that go to Robe every summer who the first thing they'll do is go to Steve, buy the latest board, and then spend the summer on the beach. And they might not do surfing any other times of the year except for when they go to Robe in the summer, but it's part of what they expect to do when they go down there. And they're people who might not consider that they're part of the surfing culture at all, and yet it's a big part of their experiencing their summer holidays and the Easter holidays at Robe. And people who would never pay attention to surfing at any other time of the year will go and sit in the freezing cold at 6 a.m. on Easter, Saturday or Sunday, depending which day the waves are best, and watch the surfing competition. And they will take no notice of surfing at all anywhere else at any other time but at that weekend. It's really woven itself into the fabric of the town. And I think there's a lot of other coastal communities in South Australia that are the same.
Yeah. And did Steve mourn the loss of that kind of small subculture part of surfing, or did he think, you beaut, now I've got this shop and people are going to come here and make me lots of money? Like, did he live that tension between it being a small underworld special culture that shaped his life versus it being a big commercial enterprise?
So Steve, he's still alive, he's in his 80s. I have to say he's still alive. Not very well, but he's still alive. He's a very astute businessman. He was a really sharp businessman, and he, you know, people will say that he recognised the business opportunity of loading up the mini moke and taking the surfboards down the road, and then where that went. But he was furious the day the local ranger told him that he'd cleared the track to Stony Rise, his favourite break that he did not want to share with anyone else, and made it accessible. And the word got out because it was just him and a mate that surfed it for years, and no one else really knew it was there. And that's a big part of surfing culture. One of the things that people, there's going to be a lot of surfers who won't be happy that I'm doing this tonight, because they like the fact that a lot of people don't know that Robe has some really good spots to go surfing. They like the fact it's quiet. They don't have to fight for space in the water to ride a wave. They're quite happy that the surfing competition, all the spots always fill every year, but it's a certain sort of group of younger surfers who are just trying to make their way into the surfing competitions. And a few old hands locally. There's one guy who's in his 60s who Steve always reckoned could have been a national champion, but he did not want to be part of the whole commercial scene. This guy told me once his favourite moments are sitting on a board off the back beach and watching the kangaroos come on through the sandhills and watching the sunrise. Yeah. And that's what surfing's about for him. So there is a tension between... Yeah. You know, what Robe has become with 15,000 people rocking up into the town on the day after Christmas, and Easter even crazier, and that driving the business with what Steve and a lot of his mates would prefer when they go surfing for themselves.
Great. Thanks, Liz. I feel like this is a natural pivot to you, Ty, because you are... you're a practitioner, but you're also kind of really entrepreneurial, right? And so you would be living that tension between, I guess, the part of you that's the playful artist that wants to keep burrowing further and further and further away into obsessive and eccentric and weird-ass crazy stuff. Yeah. And then the part of you that wants to make it really accessible too, because you love bringing people in, but also it's good business sense.
Yeah, it is it's an interesting thing, making events accessible, fun, and tapping into making it sort of feel mainstream but still underground, because you sort of need to satisfy two different cultures, or which I found over the years as Ultracade Live grew. And when it was presented in sort of festival context, it was more broad, and the scale and what I presented was, my lens was less hardcore. But when I had it at a cabaret venue, it was more niche, and each flyer and each event had a theme and that kind of stuff. So it really tie in, that culture, that the games they knew, but the games no one else really knew. Does that make sense? Like I was trying to really, just cater for both, but also have a good night, and a good night for the bar as well. And there's a lot of people to involved to make it successful. And with the installations, that's a slightly different thing. It's making sure they're accessible and engaging and impactful, and that message in the artwork is sort of, the audience could grab onto and resonate with. Yeah.
There's a lot in that. I mean, I'm curious, and I'm going to turn to you in a minute, Di, but I'm curious about how you keep yourself fresh, because you've got to be kind of pushing boundaries all the time, right? So how do you keep playful?
I don't know. I think it's I just have these bouts of sort of mad professor.
I can't imagine that.
Yeah, it's quite irrational, and I do hyper focus on these kind of projects. I have a feeling, and then I can see it in my head, and then I try to execute all of it. And it's never great financially doing these things, but it's a feeling which I don't know. I think one thing I didn't share in the talk, there's my Uma, which inspired me, but my Upa also inspired me a lot. He always gave us free access to the shed with all the tools, wood. He taught me how to do wood turning. My dad was an opal miner, so he taught me how to prepare opal rocks and stuff like that as well. So there was a lot of this kind of hands-on, you're free to go on the shed and don't cut off your arm. That's the main thing, that kind of rogue, that era of rogue parenting and that. But there, I think I was given a lot of permission, in that permission to allow to dream and try ideas, which I still hold dearly to me.
Yeah. It seems to be like the spirit of subcultures is to keep those elements alive, and for them, that's almost the most important thing that they have in common, this desire to keep that joy, that playfulness, that sense of belonging as well seems to be incredibly important. Ways of belonging that allow you then to be part of these bigger things, which is the world. But as you said, remix the world on your own terms. I really love that. So let's go to you, Di, and I'm keen to hear how you feel that hip-hop and South Australia have interacted with each other. So the Hilltop Hoods are just such a mega thing. I'd love to hear you maybe talk a little bit more about them and, I don't know, something about them, this subculture, and South Australia.
Yeah, thank you. So they very much came up in the battle scene in South Australia, at very small events, very dingy, kind of grungy, 50-person events, and just grew that audience through their professionalism. They're very well known for having a fantastic live performance and stage show, even from their very early performances. They themselves in media have said that they were just kind of lucky, like right time, right place, had to happen eventually, had to have a local act to become big at some point. But I certainly think their rhyme schemes, very clear, very quotable, very interesting. They have really built that underground audience and had some very famous live shows with quite massive capacity locally. So they've become, I guess, a bit of an icon of the hip-hop scene and very phenomenal success. So I think if you ask people about hip-hop, probably they are people who would most readily come to mind. There have been some criticisms, not of them specifically, but of the hip-hop scene perhaps being very white in Australia, and a lot of white people gaining the most popularity, having the most success. So there's been a lot of questions around why that is in a society like Australia, that it is people who become most prominent when there are obviously very talented and awesome people from really diverse cultural backgrounds and always have been here in Australia. So that, I think, has been quite contentious and a lot of debate around that within the scene itself. Also, the scene is very male dominated, so thinking about women in hip-hop and gender diverse women in hip-hop, and why haven't they always been spotlighted, even though they have been very fundamental. The Hoods themselves have had a lot of initiatives in the past to try and mentor local people coming up. They quite often have kind of people who are just starting to break through as their support acts. Like Briggs, if people are aware, was a support act for the Hilltop Hoods before going on to become one half of AB Original with Trials, a Narrandjeri man who's very successful in the Funkors, the group I briefly talked about before that. So it's quite a vibrant scene happening. And I guess hip-hop always is about who you are and where you're from. So in that way, I think it's very bound up with South Australia and local slang and local references, and a key kind of way that people tell the story of what it means to be a person living in this country.
And what it means to be South Australian too, huh? Right. Well, let's open the floor to your questions now. We've got, 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll close with one or two questions as well. So could I just ask you to make them questions, not statements? And over to you, Brian. No, we need it for recording, so it's helpful if you do. Oppositional to the last.
I was a surfer from the early 60s to early 70s until my father sold my Gordon Woods, which was advertised up there at the surf shop, surfboard, 9'6" Malibu. He sold it without my knowledge. I was generally jacked off. Now, may I ask you, have you ever watched the film Endless Summer?
Yes. In fact, one of the things I did with Steve to try and sort of, get a bit better handle on his world was to watch his favourite surf movies with him and listen to his favourite music albums. And it was a good way for him too to explain to me what the techniques in surfing and the different boards. So that was part of the process.
Bruce Brown was a pioneer filmmaker in Australia, produced that iconic film. Yes. And in that film, they went around Australia and mainly South Africa, as you know. And the locals did share their hidden spots, not from what you were saying down at Robe, so they were very selfish surfers down there by the sound of it. But the general, back in my era, in that 60s era, we publicised to all our surfing friends a good spot if we found it. So that was, I'm surprised you stuck more to the 70s rather than the early 60s, which was my period of time, and it was, I did a lot of my surfing down the mid-south coast, down at Southport, and wetsuits were for pussies. Right? We had budgie smugglers. We'd go out for about half an hour, middle of winter, and get cold. We'd run from the mouth of the Onkaparinga River to Noarlunga Jetty and back, got warm and went back out again for another half hour.
I think there was a bit of that too. At Robe in the summer, there's a thing called the Bonnie Upwelling, and the water temperature almost overnight drops 14 degrees. I used to swim at Robe in the winter and swear the water was warmer than it was in the summer, and it turns out I probably wasn't that far off. But yeah, for a lot of years they didn't have wetsuits. Steve only started surfing in '66, and he did surf up here quite a bit, but as I said to you, he was a country kid, and he preferred to surf in sort of more isolated beaches. He, if surfers came to town and asked, they were always taken and shown the breaks. What they were, I think probably what Steve was less, the learner surfers were encouraged to stick to Long Beach where they couldn't get into trouble. Some of the back breaks at Robe are incredibly dangerous. Steve and his son Sam both rescued more than a few people who got into serious trouble. So they were encouraged to go to Long Beach, which is very accessible. And, on good weekends, there's just kilometres of cars down there with surfboards and, kids.
Thanks, Brian and Liz. Any other questions? Any other questions? Okay, yep, I'll give you another one. Yeah. Yeah, it's all right. I see you. It's okay. It's okay. The microphone's over there. That's okay. It's okay.
To our gaming friend up here.
Excuse me.
To our gaming friend up here. Can you tell me why the trend to have talking over music? Now, you actually did it in your presentation a couple of times while the video was playing. And on your video, some of your videos, there's vocals over music. And it's the trend in TV programs for the last 20 years. Can you explain why that trend has come into entertainment of any description, including your gaming, obviously?
I don't know. They were just promo videos of my events. just so they were easy to sort of express what the event was on social media. So as you can see, the videos were quite short. It's just I just did it to help get the message across of what the event's about. Yeah.
Di,
That's okay.
You might have an answer to this too, because I mean it's got a long tail, that tradition. It goes back to beat poets as well. You know, talking to music. I think Bob Dylan would describe that before his folk tradition came up. But there's a beat poet tradition of talking their poetry over music too, isn't there? Like you could talk to somebody?
A tiny bit.
on the spot.
Yeah, well, I guess a lot of hip hop is rapping over music, and I understand you're saying for you it's hard to understand and you're kind of missing the message, but I think for a lot of people it becomes quite intuitive and easy to listen to, and they wouldn't necessarily see it as like discordant. They would see the two as being working in harmony together, and I would say the same in a lot of electronic music.
Yeah, for sure. There's been some interesting studies of a lot of modern electronic music where older audiences don't resonate with this modern electronic music because there's a lot of frequencies which younger people hear due to the age of the ears as well. So as you age, the ear frequencies change of what you can hear and what you resonate with. So some of the younger sort of modern club music, there's certain sort of high frequencies and certain things which really, speak to the younger culture, but also the younger ear. So that could be a part of music and where there's that. I feel with a lot of music, it's not the music's fault that you're not into it, it's you're not ready, you know? So, because there is always a subculture.
Yeah, Brian, it's your fault.
No, but there's always, with any style of music or any culture, there's people who are into it. And if you're not into it, it's up to you as an active participant in the culture to find a way to get ready and, you know, embrace yourself with it. And that's with music, movies, entertainment, performance and that kind of stuff. So I think it's an opportunity for learning and an opportunity to be proactive in the culture. That's okay. And
maybe it's used for different users.
And maybe that's a great thing. You know, you also need to filter out, you know. That's what's hot about cultures as well, and subcultures is it's not for everyone. So that's what makes it special for the people who are into that culture. So it's not a negative, it's just a thing. You see that with punk music, and you saw that with the Sex Pistols and that, you know. Anything, Elvis with his pelvis, you know.
It's more to Elvis than his pelvis. But I like this idea of there being difficult pleasures too, that you have to lean into and inquire about and keep being curious about in order to find your way into them. So not everything is an immediate, sugar hit. So would you like to ask a question? Yeah. And then Paul at the back. Is there any other people who wanted to ask questions? Okay.
My first question is general for the whole panel. Has there ever been any original culture in Australia after colonization? And specifically about hip-hop. I happen to be American, so I know that hip-hop is a product of African Americans, and it has always been a protest movement. That is why the First Nations of Australia readily adopted it. And you didn't tell us a word about it. Why not?
Okay. So just before we invite you to answer that question, I just want to put one piece in there, that you put a really interesting word into the conversation tonight about, you use this word originality. And I think words like originality, like authenticity, are really complex, loaded, freighted words. You know, we often use them to try and quarantine a culture and say that's its perfect moment. But like life, culture is constantly organic, constantly growing and changing, ever dynamic. So I would want to just perhaps unpack that word, original, a little bit more that you used in your opening question, to which I think there's a lovely provocation in there, which is how are we reinventing our culture upon these unsettled foundations of Australian society. That to me is kind of at the spirit of your question, but steers us away from these questions about originality. And I think each of these subcultures is engaging with that challenge of culture being ever hybrid. So I can see that alive in all of your works. Would anyone like to answer that question before we go into the hip-hop question? I mean, surfing has a complex relationship with colonisation, and I would imagine gaming, First Nation culture has a lot of gaming in it, and hip-hop culture does too. Ty, did you want to speak to that question at all?
Oh, it's a big one.
Yeah.
I think I'll pass it on to...
No,
I'll pass it on.
Yeah.
I think absolutely there have been original subcultures in Australia. So there's groups like the Bodgies and Widgies, there's the Sharpies in the 1970s, which many people argue predates punk. So there's a lot of original things that started here. So I think it's a bit of a misnomer to say that Australia has never had any of its own unique subcultures. But I do also agree that thinking about the cultural work that people here in this country put in to make subcultures their own, to localise them, to customise them, to bring to the fore their own voices and concerns, is a really vital part of subcultures. So I don't think it's ever just whole-scale imported. I think there's always important debates around what does it mean, how can it mean, should we be taking it up. That's a very important debate in hip-hop, especially amongst people who are white, and maybe this is a segue into the other part of the question. I think you're right, I could have foregrounded First Nations people more in that talk. I did talk about how I think a lot of the rejection of hip-hop is bound up in racism, and there I was trying to flag the really important contributions that First Nations people have made to hip-hop in this country. There's really fundamental groups like Southwest Syndicate in Sydney. There's amazing First Nations artists across all of the elements of hip-hop. And beyond just First Nations, there are people from diverse backgrounds, all kinds of cultural backgrounds who've been very fundamental, from Tonga, from Pacific Islands, from Italy, from a whole range of different people really coming together to make hip-hop alive and what it is in this country. Yeah, so I take that on board. That could have been more of a focus, but wasn't my aim in the 15 minutes that I had tonight.
Thank you. Paul, did you have a question?
Thanks. I think it's actually perfect segue from it. So would any of the panel, I've got to frame this right, would any of the panel care to comment on any pressure they have perceived or understood on the subculture they are involved in to be perfect? This is often levelled at subcultures by a non-perfect dominant culture.
So you're kind of saying maybe one way of thinking about this question, not that you didn't ask a really interesting question, but another way would be what kind of pressures do dominant cultures put back on your subculture, and how do you interact with them? Is that?
Yeah, look, it's to give an example would be to narrow it, but let's give one. Masculinity in gaming is often levelled at the gaming world. Hip-hop, masculine, full of men. It's exactly, I'm just about to go surfing as well. So that's one. There's the lack of, the subcultures are criticised for not being perfectly rounded by, and there's a pressure to that, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, it's interesting. For me, my biggest influence for gaming and that stuff was my grandma, who was female. She was born in the 30s, before, internet, a lot of main computers before it was consumer. And she wasn't she wasn't trying to be cool. It wasn't even uncool. I know mainstream, a lot of gaming was uncool, and also putting the events on. There is that kind of push of turning nerd into cool as well. But yeah, for me, I didn't see that growing up at all, and I think maybe it's just what you experience and what you explore as well. Even early in my DJ career, one of the most influential DJs I saw was a female DJ from the UK, and it was her kind of performance style, and that sort of gave me confidence or permission to perform a bit more open-handed and a bit more freely, as I'm quite a shy person in public, but hiding behind technology, it makes it a bit safer, like a little castle, But yeah, from my personal lived experience, I've found, women being a lot of the beacons for me, but it hasn't been a gender thing. It's just down to their passion and just keenness.
I see it as an unfair criticism, but it's used by the dominant culture as a gotcha moment a lot of the time. You're just this, therefore we're going to dismiss you. Whereas the lived experience is it's wide, it's diverse. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add on to that. Yeah, I think hip hop especially is often a scapegoat. It's often called out for being racist or sexist or promoting misogyny, crime, a lot of ills. But I think hip hop is such a beautiful and wide spectrum. And I think there's often a lot of moral panic around subcultures, and they're used in quite divisive ways, moralistic ways, and often to kind of target what young people are doing and what they're passionate about without thinking about what it means to them and their own understandings. And some people I've interviewed have explicitly said, yes, there's sexism in hip-hop. Yes, hip-hop's male-dominated. Look at the society we're in. This is the same. So why are we being asked to not be this when this is the broader kind of political ideologies and things that are existing in Australia? So they're certainly not saying, yay, let's marginalise women. They're actively trying to change that, but they are at the same time saying this is an issue in many areas, so why specifically is it a problem when it comes to a culture like hip-hop or surfing or gaming?
Could I just add one last thing? Just regarding like the hip-hop, I think Blondie with the song Rapture was one of the first mainstream hip-hop songs as well, where obviously she was getting influence partying at the Roxy, which was like a melting pot of reggae, early break dance, hip-hop, punk, and disco and all that kind of stuff. And she was like seeing Grandmaster Flash, Cool Herc, as you mentioned, that kind of stuff. And that's where she, put lyrics in, and that's another female just leading. But yeah, so I think depending where you look, a lot of that kind of stuff can be dropped, I reckon. And if you look in the early hip hop, there's heaps of female rappers as well, from the early 80s in New York and the Bronx and that kind of stuff. And they were breaking out stuff. You see it in the films Wild Style and that stuff, yeah.
And I have nickname envy. Like, I want a cool subculture nickname now. So just as a way of wrapping up, I would like to ask our panellists, unless anyone's got a final question, just a wrap-up question. Ty, I'm going to start with you. How has the subculture that you've built your life around and also you've built, how has it changed? How has it made you who you are? Let's get right down to it.
It feels like a therapy session now. But
Oh, it is.
as a child, it was just a form of escapism and a lot of joy. And as I grew up, gaming would come in and out like the tide, due to sort of the expectations of being an adult and then becoming a parent. Gaming would be put aside. There was guilt and shame around that for a period, as I was always tied to the hustle and the grind of a music career. Gaming and that stuff gave me that kind of way through, but still creating a body of work. And now, through my late diagnosis with autism, I've sort of realised that music and gaming were my main things and passions and places of calm. So I'm sort of rediscovering it as a beautiful place, without the guilt and shame, if that makes sense. And that's duly a lot to do with society and also just personal things of wanting to do stuff and get stuff done, to provide and all that kind of stuff.
Thanks, Ty. Over to you, Di. So you've made hip-hop a huge part of your professional life and your personal life. What's it meant to you, on a real kind of personal level, and what are you up to next with that?
I just love hip-hop. I think there's
Why do
something
you love
about
it so
it.
much?
It's just so creative, expressive, it's powerful. I love the music. It's a big part of, when I'm coming home on the bus, listening to music constantly. I think it's a big soundtrack to your life. I just feel like it's a real honour and privilege to talk to people about hip-hop and what it means to them, and to help to gather their stories and preserve that. Is really fundamentally important to me, and I think it comes from that perspective of feeling like some histories are not valued and some histories are overlooked. So trying to make sure that passion is on the record and people do better understand why hip-hop is a big calling to people, and the role it has in their lives, social networks. I met my partner through hip hop, so we had friends who had a little club night, and basically got together through sharing albums and sharing music recommendations. And I see that all the time in the interviews I do, the friendships that people have, not just through music, but through dance and through art as well. So I think it's really powerful.
Thanks, Di. And Liz, question for you. Where are the gaps in surfing history in South Australia, and what do you think requires or would be worthy of future investigation? Now, I had to twist Liz's arm to come and do this talk tonight. She reckons that there would have been 20 different people that would have been great at this topic who also surf, but she was willing to do it because of her love of Rove, because of her appreciation of Steve, and because she loved writing that book. And since then, you've kind of said to me a few times, these are all the places where this research could go in the future. So what are you thinking about with all of that?
I think it's, we've kind of reached a critical point that a lot of those people who were involved in the early emergence of the strong surf scene in South Australia are getting old. Steve was in his early 20s, so he was a latecomer when he started surfing. So, he's now in his 80s. And if their memories are not recorded, while they can still share them, and they've still got their memories, and the stories of the everyday people, just, the kids who loved surfing, Steve's well known in Robe and in certain circles, but he's the first one to say he's not famous, and a lot of the people I interviewed that are his surfing mates, are not famous either, but they had great memories and also insights into some people who were, because they were behind the scenes. And Steve had a heart attack before I started doing the interviews with him, and he realised at that point that even his own kids did not know about his life, really, and didn't know those stories. And he and his mates might sit around and talk about them all the time, but no one outside that group knew them. So it gave him a fresh sense of urgency about wanting to record it, so that was there. And I see it all the time in communities that I work in, and I've done a lot of oral history projects with different local history groups and a lot of history writing workshops, and you can leave it too late. I've gone to interview farm women and people in rural communities who are in their 80s and 90s, and the memories are not as strong as they were. Someone should have talked to them when they were in their 50s and 60s, and then, maybe done it again 10 years later. So I think there should be a sense of urgency of capturing the stories from the surf scene now. And one of the people who I am actively chipping away at behind the scenes is Sharon Smith, Ron Smith's daughter, who is fascinated by the family stories, and they're incredible stories. Every time I talk to her, there's another fabulous story or some amazing photographs. Some of the photos, I only sort of shared a few of the photos she gave me tonight, and that family was involved in so many aspects of the surf culture. The board making, and even outside that, the speedboats and the surfwear and the fashions, and the rivalry with John Arnold, another big name in surfing entrepreneurship, not just in Australia but internationally. And there's, I think there needs to be more of an effort. Torquay and the Surf Coast in Victoria, they've got an amazing National Surf Museum. I'm not sure how much South Australian content there is in there. So I think it's actually, it's kind of fallen out of the loop a little bit. So hopefully Sharon will at least, she's steeling herself to sit down and write and start to put some of the family stories on paper for people.
Thanks. A sense of urgency about the stories that are part of our everyday social life that make up our social history. It seems a really potent point to finish on, because we've seen history being actively sought after, part of a practice, and we saw Ty's body of work and as something that, with the rest of his community, should be archived and collected as well, so that we keep an eye on our cultures and our subcultures and the traditions and how they need to be brought to life again and again. Our hope at the History Trust, I think, in curating tonight's session is that you'll look anew at the world around you, the people that you sit on the bus with, and be thinking about the worlds that shape them, the remixed worlds that are happening for them. What I got out of tonight was joy. That joy drives these subcultures and their creations and recreation. It's a fundamental part of the human experience. And inside of that joy is belonging, these feelings of belonging that are so important to us. So I want to thank you all for coming together tonight for this experience. Behind the scenes is the extraordinary Suze Redman, who does so much to make these nights happen. So a big thanks to Suze Redman. She has been the mistress of this program for an extraordinarily long time. She knows what she's doing, and she is warmth and kindness and professionalism personified. Thank you to the State Library and to Patrick Pajula. Thank you to our audience. And I just want to also say, 15 minutes of preparation, it actually represents weeks of work, and before that, weeks and weeks of thought. So much thought goes into these presentations, and I sincerely want to thank our speakers, and I'm sure you do tonight, for what they've given and shared. So please thank our speakers. Thank you, everyone. And that's a wrap from DJ Kidge. Yo!